Isel Latatia. When you hear that name, it will turn out to have something to do with yourself. The people who attended the ball, when they heard that name, they immediately knew who it was. One of them suggested that this might be the name of a little girl who lived next door, but the girl said no, and that girl's name was Aina. Anyway, Isel's name was not famous, and apparently the girl was a minor character in this novel. A man approached her and asked. She was the one who asked to see him, but didn't wait for an answer. He said that he'd heard her sending people to him every day for a month to get an audience. He wasn't the kind of man to meet with just because she wanted him to. Isel said she knew who he was and called him Archduke Karlberg Byron. The girl said she wanted to meet him because the Archduke was not the kind of man who could see dogs and cows. Karl didn't understand what she meant, so he asked, "What's that got to do with dogs, much less cows?" But the girl giggled and didn't answer. Isel asks why he shouldn't sit down. She wants to get a proper look at the man, who is not an easy person to meet on the street. There's a chair across the hall for that. Karl didn't say anything back and just stood there looking at her. Then the girl smiled and said her name was Isel Flying Spencer. When Karl said it was the first time he had ever heard the name, the girl replied that it was okay. The man wondered, why is that? He must remember her. Then he asked, is she really an aristocrat? Isel explained that her family had recently been given the title of aristocrats, so it was not well known to many people, but that was only for now. No matter how hard Karl tried to remember, there was no way he could recall the last name Spencer. He'd never heard of them. Isel, when she looked at the guy, she realized that he had a very pensive expression on his face. And afterward, she told him not to worry about it too much. It didn't really matter what family Isel was from or what her name was. The girl said it was all about the fact that she had come to meet Archduke Byron. And so after numerous attempts, he, the Archduke, finally came to see her. And that's what really matters. Charles said he had been busy reorganizing the army in recent days. He had to expel and exile and arrest the men she had sent, but she went on and on about it. Carla replied that he just wanted to see the one who had so insistently asked to see him without even properly giving his name. The girl said that the man so insistent the Archduke was right in front of him, but Charles replied that he just hoped it was worth it for the relentless pursuit all month. Isel said nothing, but simply smiled. At that moment he thought, is there really a person in the world who can laugh in front of him like that? Archduke Karlberg Byron. It was as if he was born straightforward, spoke little, but when he did speak, he seemed very majestic. Because of this, Charles had problems not only with his adjutants and knights, but even with members of the imperial family. Karl had broad shoulders and graceful facial features, but most women avoided him. Even with his biography and appearance, it was not easy for ladies to approach him. Then the man told Isel to start with the main thing. The girl was surprised and asked if that meant he didn't have time even for a cup of tea. Karl replied that as she saw it, yes. Isel realized that this could very well have happened. Then the girl said she needed his help. Carla was surprised and asked if she hadn't heard what he'd said earlier. He was so busy he didn't have time to blink. Isel replied that she had heard everything, but she would still risk asking for a favor. But that didn't mean the help would be free. Of course she would pay a fair price for it. Then suddenly the Archduke hesitated and after a few minutes asked, what kind of help does she need? He will listen to her first and then make a decision. Isel replied that it was no big deal. She was just going to do something, but it would be pretty noisy that some might even confuse it with a riot. Karl was surprised and asked what she meant, but the girl ignored his question and said she hoped the Archduke could calm the people down. It's simple, isn't it? Karl thought that rebellion and participation in a conspiracy was punishable by death for 3 generations of the family. He wondered, it was beyond the realm of being a conspirator. Then he told her in a menacing tone not to even mention it. Was she now suggesting that he lead the rebellion? Isel knew exactly how he was reacting, and exactly as the girl had intended, but there was nothing she could do about it anymore. House Byron was a family of knights who had sworn oaths with the imperial family for probably 500 years. Besides, the men of the Archduke's family were famous for not being worshipful and cruel. Asking him to participate in the rebellion would be like killing him on the spot. The girl had already replayed their conversation several times in her head. It wouldn't embarrass her in the slightest. Isel told him that he must have misunderstood something. She didn't ask him to become the leader of the rebellion, just said it would be nice if his power protected them from the limits of law and authority. Karl asked, Isn't that the same thing? Then the girl replied that it was completely different. Besides, she was not going to rebel. Isel, after a little thought, said he could look at it as saving the Empire and the world. The girl said that he probably already knew that demons and monsters banished to the edge of the world were returning. Carl was surprised and asked how I knew that, but the girl ignored that and continued talking, saying that if they continued like this, the Empire seemed to be in great danger. Right now there are not enough resources or food to winterize and feed the soldiers. She asked how to protect herself from the demons if they couldn't even feed the people. Isel dared to say that 15 days would be enough for the imperial castle to collapse. Carl continued to listen to her intently, and she asked that he help her. Then she would take care of the problem with the soldiers. Guy asked what she meant by that, and Isel explained that she would provide food for 500,000 soldiers, clothing, dry wood, oil and flint to start a fire, anything they would need. Carl was very surprised at this, for he had been trying to solve this problem for over 2 months, and she had come up with a solution right now. Moreover, a year's supply of food appealed to him. Isel said that of course it would all be free if he helped her. Carl turned to the girl and said that she said she would do it for free. After that he apologized because he started talking to her on you, and asked, will she really do it? The girl was pleased that he was trying to treat her respectfully, and replied that yes, it would be free. Carl then asked if she knew what the prices were now. Isel said that of course she knew. They were about 10 times higher than the prices they had been in the summer. Carl was surprised, and asked if knowing that, she would give it away for nothing. Isel asked if that wouldn't be enough. If she was asking a busy man like him for help, she should pay a decent price for it. The girl laid the map on the table and said that she was well aware of Archduke Byron's place in the Empire. A man has far more power than His Majesty the Emperor under martial law, so he is the only person she can turn to for help. Carl was surprised and asked who she was after all. This was the first time he had heard of her family. Also, the girl knows a secret that only a few people know and gives him such ridiculous conditions. Carl asked who was hiding behind the mask of an aristocrat after all. The girl smiled at that. Afterwards said that her true identity was that she lived in poverty, but didn't think money was the most important thing. She thought that there were many things that could not be bought. Carl didn't understand why she was telling this story. But then suddenly the girl laughed and said that it was all nonsense, because money was everything. They made it possible to take over the Empire's information network, buy a strong wizard or 100,000 mercenaries to fight monsters, and they also made it possible to capture the most powerful man in the Empire. Isel said she didn't have time. There was so much money she didn't have time to use it, and there's still not enough time. Therefore, if he is not satisfied with her proposal, then let him tell them. There is no time to waste. They must go to His Majesty the Emperor immediately. Then the girl told him to choose, but only let him not delay in choosing. After a while the Archduke, after thinking it over, gave the girl the papers. Isel thanked him for making his decision so quickly. Then suddenly Carl asked, "What about before?" The girl didn't understand what he was talking about. He explained that she had said they knew each other. Carl asked what she meant. The girl immediately replied that that was exactly what she meant. Then he assumed that they had already met. Isel didn't answer anything. She just sat there and smiled. Carl didn't remember all the people he had met in the past, so it was quite possible that he had forgotten someone, but he didn't understand what this strange and unpleasant feeling he had. Then Carl asked when they had met. The girl answered that it had been a long time ago. It must have been more than 10 or perhaps 15 years. Carl was surprised to realize that they had met when they were just over 10. Isel said she could quite understand why he couldn't remember. As a rule, people remember their childhood very poorly. Besides, they didn't have the opportunity to meet at a more conscious age. Carl still couldn't figure out why she'd mentioned it. Isel asked him, so interested. The girl, without waiting for an answer, said that he was a coward then. Carl was very surprised and asked what that meant, but the girl went on and said he was also a crybaby. He grabbed her when she was about to go home, and said that later, when she grew up, they should get married. At this point, Isel moved closer to the boy. Foster parents who raised the girl as their own for 20 years, or the real dad and mom who only showed up now. Who would she choose? If someone asks her one day, she will not hesitate to pick her rich biological parents from a family of conglomerates. although she is very grateful to her adoptive parents who raised her for so long. In this world, truth is on the side of whoever has the money. From an early age, the girl realized that happiness can be bought if you are very rich. It was thanks to her foster parents that she accepted this simple truth. Immediately after the girl was adopted, they had twins, and all the attention went to them, and she was left alone. Therefore, as soon as the girl grew up, she decided to live separately from her family. It was then that it became clear to her that people in the real world without money are forced to live a miserable existence. So the girl couldn't help but be happy when she was reincarnated. After all, she had a second chance at a happy life. It was finally her time. She was reincarnated as a daughter in an aristocratic family, so also the eldest daughter. So the girl thought she could finally live without worrying about food, clothes, or rent. The names of emperors, high-ranking aristocrats, and the name of the country sounded vaguely familiar. But it didn't really matter to her, because she had become rich. It made absolutely no difference to her whether it was a novel or a cartoon. What mattered was that she had become an aristocrat and now needed nothing. However, the world is not as simple as she thought. In an instant, the Spencers' business goes bankrupt, and the family is in debt. The girl couldn't even believe that a nobleman could go bankrupt too. When an aristocratic family gets into debt, their property is seized. She couldn't believe it, because this is medieval society. Most rich people have savings for 3 generations to come. She didn't understand how an aristocrat could go bankrupt in just 3 days. After all that was left was a dilapidated mansion with no one to manage it, and everything could have been resolved if they had sold the mansion. But unfortunately, it belonged to the imperial family. One day they had almost nothing to eat. There was only a small bowl of soup for each of them. The girl said she was sorry she couldn't cook anything, but the man asked what else it meant. Nothing, for it was more valuable to him than any dish, and he would surely eat it all. Then the woman looked at her daughter and said that Isel should eat as soon as possible. The girl replied that she would eat it all now. It was actually overcooked soup that had been boiled several times already. They had become so poor. She said she met Lord Widgod yesterday, and his wife was very surprised, asking if he, Isel, was really his old friend. He replied that it was right, and said he had heard news of him, and had come to see if there was anything he could do to help them. His wife replied that was great, but she asked if he was thinking of going back into some weird business. The man got a little embarrassed and asked if that was possible. Because they just talked a little, that's all. Isel, hearing all this, thought that apparently it was starting up again. In fact, the Spencer family business had gone bankrupt through no fault of her father's. As soon as the business started to grow, a promissory note of debt appeared from unknown sources, and when my father inherited the place, it was already pretty hard to fix anything. And saying that he would revive the family, he started a business with the money he had left, but was eventually deceived by a friend and lost all his savings. The woman said that so be it. She would trust him anyway. Even if she wanted to stop him, she was powerless to do so after all. The man replied that it was really good. His wife explained that this is all very healthy, but it's just that the problem is that he trusts people too easily. Trusting people and losing money is acceptable when you can afford it, not when they are in that position. Then the girl said that if they are together, she doesn't mind eating watery porridge for the rest of her life, but Isel should eat well, but she can't eat properly and is starving like this. The girl didn't understand whether she was supposed to like it or not. Of course, she would be very grateful if she could have a good meal, but it was another thing to have to eat bad soup. Even if it's liquid soup, she'll eat it. At least she wouldn't have to eat under stairs. The woman had said that Isel should eat well anyway, and he understood that, didn't he? The man told her not to worry, and asked if the result of the bankrupt imperial family's application wouldn't be known next month. Then they won't be able to get certain subsidies, so there's nothing to worry about. The woman asked if he knew that there were many aristocrats who had starved to death thinking as he did. The man replied that of course he knew. Then she replied that she trusted him. Isel thought she should hurry, for she still didn't understand where she was. The girl had no idea which of the works this world belonged to. She was about 4 years old when she realized she was in a novel. She remembered familiar names and countries she had once seen in a book. But the problem was that she couldn't remember which novel it was, because there were so many of them, because the girl had read every novel she could find, so it was hard for her to guess what world she was in. If only she had a lot of money and power, She could figure something out, meeting aristocrats with familiar names. But it's not like that now. They were aristocrats, but without money or power. So the girl needs to remember the plot of this novel as soon as possible. When her father, who had left early in the morning, came in empty-handed, his slumped shoulders seemed too heavy. So she had to find out what events awaited their family. Then she can figure out a way to make money. She doesn't want to live in poverty, so she has to get rich. The girl tried to remember what that novel had been about. She supposed it might have been a harem or a magical land or poverty. She liked love novels, so it had to be that genre. It couldn't be a horror novel that she'd reread several times. At that moment, Isel heard a knock at the door. She came down from her room and didn't realize who was there. Usually no one came in this early. The girl thought maybe it was the creditors. Mom and Dad were gone, so she decided it would be better to pretend that no one was home. But the door continued to be knocked vigorously, and the girl thought it was about to be broken down and smashed to splinters. Isel realized that apparently the door was going to be knocked on until someone opened it, so she had nothing else to do. The girl went to the door and opened it. When she saw a man standing there, she asked who he was. He wasn't alone, and the guy whispered to the young gentleman that it was her. Isel thought there was a chance they showed up for the money, so she needed to look as small and innocent as possible. Then the man asked if she was Isel Lithania. The girl thought he looked rather fierce, so she called him uncle and asked him who he was. The man got angry and told her to answer the question asked of her. Is she Isel? At that moment the girl felt like slamming the door right in his face. She thought it best not to do that, so she said, "That's right, it's her." The man pulled some paper out of his pocket and said that even though her family was broke, he hoped the girl could read. Isel took the paper in her hands, and she wondered what was in it. The girl stood studying it for a long time. The man got angry and said that apparently this idiot had to be taken away with him, because she couldn't even read. So we'll have to educate her. This whole thing is a disaster. The girl was very angry that he had called her an idiot. She didn't understand why he had come to them in the first place. When she asked him, was he from the Basquiel family? The man was surprised and asked how she knew that. Isel said that it said in black and white, Basquiel family. Therefore, he is a man of that family. Then she asked if the uncle was an idiot. The man became very angry. He questioned what she had just said, but Isel ignored his question and asked what the document with the official seal was, and it seemed to be meant for her. The man still wanted her to repeat to him what she had said before, but the girl asked, "She has to show this message to her parents, doesn't she?" The young gentleman was angry beyond measure. At that moment, the girl thought, what is he going to do? Is he really going to take his anger out on a little child? The man smiled and said that he thought he should give her one piece of advice. He said that if it was a side branch of the Basquiel family, anyone could have that privilege. However, if possible, it is better to refuse this kind of venture. If you make such a decision, you will fully realize how pathetic your situation is. Isel just stood there staring at him, wondering if maybe he didn't want to lose to her, or if he was eager to curse. The man then turned around and told his charges to leave and he along with them. Isel thought, what have I had misfortune sprinkled on my head since this morning? She wondered, after this, do they scatter salt on the doorstep to banish the evil? But they are so poor, they don't even have salt. And now the girl has another reason she needs to make money. When Isel's parents returned, they read the paper. They wondered, is it really time? The man said that their situation was not an easy one. He then turned to his daughter and asked her what she had read. What did it say? Isel said descendants of side branches can attend classes organized by the Basquiel family at no cost. Her one said that just like she says, descendants of side branches can get free education. So she has that right too. Isel now remembered that the Spencer family was a side branch of the House of Basquiel, and as expected, she remembered only fragments. But one thing she knows for sure. The Basquiel family mentioned in the novel was a ducal family that controlled the entire empire. And it turns out that the ruined aristocratic family is a side branch of the very same family. The girl thought it was a fact that was shocking. Then she asked her parents, does she have to go there? Her mom said no one was forcing her. However, the Basquiel family's education is known for its high standard. My dad said they are top-notch classes that are pretty hard to get elsewhere. This means that all the children attending classes there come from families of high nobility. Isel is most likely a descendant of a side branch that can't even dream of such a noble status. The girl thought that her parents were probably worried that she would be discriminated against there and have her soul tortured. She was much more worried that her father would be hurt. Her father, who was studying the papers, thought that challenging classes taught by the best teachers provided a level of knowledge that was quite difficult to grasp. He didn't know if his little girl could do it all alone. Her mother came up to the girl and told her that they weren't restricting her in anything, and thought to herself that the girl had failed to get the basic education that every nobleman usually received. In the future, too, it is unlikely that such an opportunity will arise, so her daughter should definitely take the chance. But she didn't understand what kind of parent would be able to tell their own child that they would be bullied for coming from a poor family. Isel sat there the whole time and said that she would go there after all. Her parents asked in one voice if she was sure. Had she thought it through? It is about the Basquiel family, to get into the residence of which cannot everyone. So the girl said that she was fine, and they cannot worry, because who knows, maybe she will be able to find out something about this world. And after a while she did get there. When the girl looked at it, she didn't even expect the manor to be so huge. As she got closer, she thought it looked even more majestic than it did from afar. But then suddenly one of the guards noticed her and her father approaching them. He asked what business they had come for. The father replied that they had come by special invitation. Then he showed a piece of paper with a document. The guard was very surprised when he read that it said a side branch of the Basquiel family. After that, he looked at them. He was surprised that they were descendants of the Basquiel family. His father at this point thought he could see it all in his face that he did not trust their words. Then the man said he was Spencer. The guard, hearing this, said it was the first time he had heard such a surname. Isel thought at this point that anyone could hear a certain last name for the first time in their life, but she didn't understand how anyone could say it out loud. The girl didn't understand why the guard treated her father so disdainfully, even though her father was polite enough. Isel, after thinking about it, turned to the guard. When he heard this, he asked her if he was a nobleman. The guard was surprised and asked what she was talking about. Isel explained that most of the people who addressed her daddy as you were nobles. That's why she thought that uncle was also a nobleman. The guard was surprised. He didn't even know what to say to that. Even if the attire is unattractive, a nobleman is still a nobleman. And besides, the guards were descendants of the Basquiel side branch. The guard even got a little nervous, but then said they could go in and showed them the way to follow. Mr. Spencer was upset because even a simple guard belittles them. He couldn't imagine the contempt with which the nobles would treat Isel. He really wanted his daughter not to have a mental trauma that would stay with her forever, so he was a little worried. After this, they went into the manor house. When they reached the door, Mr. Spencer thought that, starting from this place, Isel must go alone. The girl, when she noticed her father was nervous, said she would go and everything would be fine. Her father sat down with her and told her to be careful and he had faith in her. But then all of a sudden someone came up to them and said that Spencer wasn't a bad guy. There was no way he expected to see him there. Isel recognized the voice immediately, and the man went on and said that the man was either too stubborn or a dumbass who didn't get the point. It was the same guy who had come to the girl and brought this message. At this point the man laughed and said he was probably both. He then said his name was Gerald Basquiel. Gerald also said that his son will also start taking classes this year, so he is looking forward to seeing them together. Isel remembered that Gerald was the second son of the Basquiel family. Not only did he keep making sarcastic remarks, but he was only introducing himself now. Spencer wanted to extend his hand towards him to say hello, and he said it was nice to meet him, then gave his name. But Gerald immediately removed his hand at this time, and said that there were only minutes left before class started, so they'd better get inside as soon as possible. After that, he turned around and walked away. At that moment, Isel remembered what he had said about his son being in this class. She thought she would see what was so special about him, so she had another reason why she should attend this class. After that, the girl opened the door and entered the room. As she looked around, she thought to herself that Gerald had said that class would start soon, and only one person in the class ended up attending. She thought maybe it was a group tardy. She was pushing her with her size. Then suddenly a girl in the audience spoke up. She said hello to Isel. The girl came closer to her and said she was Lancia. Isel, when she heard this, thought maybe she was using dialect because she added a Y at the end. But then suddenly the girl became very embarrassed, and with tears in her eyes, stammering, she said that she had just misspoke. Isel thought it didn't sound like it was a mistake, but it sounded really nice. Lancia got so nervous that she blurted out that she had really screwed up. Isel told the girl to calm down, so they went and sat down on the steps. Lancia, wiping her nose, said her father was from Herta, and her mother was from the province of Labor. They live in Arafox now. Isel said that now she understood where the dialect came from, and thought to herself that it was hard to imagine such a dialect. The girl is nicely dressed, as if she was going to visit the most famous coffee house in the capital. Besides, Arafox is quite far from this place. Lancia said that her mother thought that the dialect spoken in the capital was only spoken by some weasels, so she spent a year practicing speaking like an educated girl from the capital. Isel told the girl not to cry, for habits are not easily changed. And then she asked, "So what if she talks like that sometimes?" Lancia said that she had heard that people in the capital looked down on those who spoke the dialect as if they were hillbillies. It was hard enough for Isel to deny this information. Arafox is not located close by. It is a rather remote area, so it is natural for residents of the capital to think of it as a rural area. Isel said not necessarily. There are quite a few things they treat with disdain besides using dialect. Lancia asked, "Like what?" Isel told her it was a lot of things, and thought to herself that it could be poverty or status. Lancia looked at the girl and said she looked like a doll. Isel was surprised and asked why she thought that. The girl said she had never seen such sparkling red eyes in her life. "It's very beautiful." Then the girl said that she was Lancia Ermund, the second daughter of Count Ermund. Afterward asked the girl, and she, Isel introduced herself, but then suddenly someone came to them. It was a boy. He was surprised and asked, "Are they the only ones who came?" The girls walked up to him. Lancia said, and the boy asked the other, "Einzel?" Einzel was very surprised and asked, "Does he really know her?" The guy said that of course he knows who she is. She has nothing, only the name aristocrat. He'd heard his father say there was a tactless girl he'd rather not mess with. She's not on the level. Suddenly he asked Lancia if she knew who she was. If so, then why did she get involved with her? It was disgusting to even look at. She might try her best to be an aristocrat, but she wasn't. The boy said she was such an idiot, not even any different from the commoners who idly walk the streets. Isel ignored his insult and asked how old he was. The boy was surprised and asked what she meant. Isel said she thought he was older than she was. That's probably the son Gerald was talking about. The kid said of course he's older. He's 10 years old now. Then she asked why he was here then. The boy was surprised. He did not understand the question. Isel asked, "Don't they teach 8-year-olds here? What is a 10-year-old like him doing among them? Is he really that stupid?" The guy got angry when he heard that and asked how she could call him stupid. Isel said that in addition, he was 2 years older than her, but she didn't think there was much height difference between them. So she asked Lancia to stand up. Afterward she said he looked it up. He was shorter than Lancia after all. The girl asked, "Is he really 10 years old?" The guy got angry and asked what she just said. So how dare she talk to him like that? Isel asked in a calm tone what was he so angry about. She was just asking, that's all. The boy continued to be indignant, but Isel did not listen to him. She thought that beans grow when they are planted, and red beans grow when red beans are planted. She didn't understand how it was that every time she saw annoying people, the words came out of her own mouth. The guy yelled and told her to apologize to him right away. Isel asked, "Is he really apologizing?" The boy said of course she should apologize immediately for teasing him. The guy asked if she even knew who he was, but when he saw the girl's puzzled face, he asked how come she didn't know him. Isel, how would she know? Is he Mengu from the house next door or Yungu from the house behind? Although she knows whose son he is, that's something. The boy was surprised and asked, "Doesn't she know Raven Baskiel?" Isel said she didn't know. Then she turned to her friend and asked if she knew. It made Raven even more angry, and he asked how she could not know him. It was mind-boggling. Isel suddenly wondered if all high-ranking aristocrats lacked a little bit of brains. Raven thought it would never happen. Suddenly the girl said, "Here's the trick. I wonder what really happened." The boy got very angry and told her to shut up. Is she kidding? Let her apologize. Apologize for calling him stupid and teasing him about his short stature. Isel wondered what would happen if she refused. Children who were coddled and done over until they got what they wanted, She'd experienced it firsthand when she'd taken care of her foster parents' twins in the past. When the girl hesitated and afterwards said, "Okay, so be it, she'll apologize." Raven is like that. Let her bow and apologize properly. In fact, the girl was kind of even stressed about it. When she came closer to him, the guy thought that she would finally apologize and everything was as it should be. Isel bowed and apologized profusely, but said it was her. Hit him right on the nose. The boy was bleeding straight through. Lancia was shocked. She didn't expect this turn of events. She shouted that his nose was bleeding for someone to help. After this incident, Isel sat quietly in her seat in the auditorium. The girl wondered if she had hit him too hard. Raven, whose nose was bleeding, decided not to listen to the lecture and ran out of the classroom. Isel sat staring at nothing with a completely indifferent face. Isel doesn't think you can just stand by and take it. Yeah, she didn't really mean to do that. It just happened. At that moment, a teacher came into the auditorium. When he was looking at the children who were sitting, he said that one seat was empty. After that, he said his name was Erzakiel. He is a scholar of the Baskiel family who will be in charge of this class from now on. At this moment, Erzakiel looked at Azel and thought that it must be a servant. Next to the blonde hair and blue eyes, it's clearly Lancia Ermund Rogan, the second daughter of the Earl family. The man thought that it was common for nobles to bring a servant with them to class out of habit. When he said that at least he was warned about it in advance from time to time, he encountered such a situation daily. When he turned to Miss Lancia and told her that her servants could not be brought to class, the girl was very much surprised. The teacher said that he understood that it must be awkward for her to be in a place like this alone, but he would have her slowly order her maid to leave the classroom. Lancia couldn't understand if he was saying that about Isel. Erzakiel said that if she suddenly refused to take the maid out of the room, she would lose her right to listen to his lecture. But then Isel suddenly spoke up and said that she was not a servant. The teacher asked what she was saying now. Then the girl took out a document and showed that it came in her name. Erzakiel took and studied the paper. Then he asked, "Is it she, Miss Isel?" The girl looked at him fiercely. Then the teacher thought that how could she even be called a descendant of a side branch of the Basquiel family? Isel, of course, understood what he thought about it. Then he gave her the document and said that he had misunderstood everything. After that he apologized for his tactlessness. Isel was surprised at this, for she had thought she would blatantly ignore her blunder. But he even apologized and readily admitted that he had done wrong. Toward the end of the lecture, the teacher said they needed to know that in this class, they would learn the basic skills every nobleman needed. After that he showed a book and said that it was their study guide. If they read this book from the next class, they could start taking the exam right away. The content is a bit complicated, but diligent students who have received proper education since childhood will have no problems with the flow of this monumental work. The children were very upset that they were going to have an exam. Isel thought that no young child would be happy to have to take an exam, especially when it came to mastering such a large book at an age when, at best, fairy tales were to be read. Then she wondered if the book would already have to be given away for free, because judging by the thickness, it wasn't the cheapest. Then the teacher said that the book can be easily bought in any store, so he urged them to purchase such a monumental work. Isel was shocked at having to buy a book. Erzakiel said that this was the end of their class, and they would see each other next week. Then he asked that Isel stay a little while after all the other children had gone out. She and Lancia approached the teacher, and the girl asked him what was wrong. When the longtime teacher took the book and told her to take it, Isel picked it up and was shocked. She did not understand why he was giving her the book. But then suddenly Erzakiel began to put some more books and documents in her hands, and told her to take them all. And after that she followed him. Isel was shocked. She didn't understand. Did he disdain her because she was a noblewoman from a bankrupt family? Maybe he's trying to use her as an errand girl. Suddenly Lancia came up to her and offered to help her. But the girl refused, saying that it was all right, she could manage on her own. Then she said that she would be back soon. After that they left the classroom and walked for some time. Suddenly the teacher stopped and looked at the girl. Isel was very tired. She thought he could walk slower. Why go so fast she could not keep up with him? Erzakiel looked at her, not realizing if she was angry as he took some books and paper from her but left her one. Isel was surprised and asked, "Did he forget this one? This book?" But the teacher replied that she should keep it. Isel was surprised and asked why. Erzakil said he had another one like it, so it was all right. The girl asked what having one had to do with what he was giving her. The question seemed logical to the man. The teacher turned to her and said that the book was old, so he was going to throw it away anyway, so she could have it for herself if she wanted. Isel looked at the book and thought it was very clean. Although it was obvious that it had been read more than once, it was in perfect condition for use. Erzakil said he didn't need the book, so she could take it and do what she wanted. She could either throw it away or burn it. Isel looked at him and asked if he had called her on purpose to go and give it to her. Erzakil said it wasn't quite like that. The girl didn't understand why he was so opposed to it. If it wasn't, there would be no need for him to call her to come with him. He noticed that the girl was worried about where she could get the book. Then Isel thanked him and told him that she would use it carefully. Erzakil heard these words and said that he thought it was time for her to go back. Isel looked at the book once more. She was glad. Now she had one less thing to waste. But then suddenly, when she opened the book, she saw a signature. The girl was surprised that his last name was Velen. She thought she had heard that name somewhere before. Then suddenly Isel remembered the words, "Immerse your drink in the storm summoned by Archmage Velen in the monocle." She realized that her teacher was Archmage Velen, a supreme mage with a monocle. Velen was a sorcerer who ruled the sea surface, a personage whose character was always accompanied by storms and heavy rains. He was also called the Devil of the Sea. Before heading out to sea, sailors drank alcohol and sang songs to swallow the storm caused by Velen. The phrase, "dip your drink into the storm caused by Velen the Archmage in the monocle," appeared. It was then that the phrase appeared. She couldn't believe that this man was the Archmage. Isel was on her way home and thought about the fact that in the novel, he was slightly over 40 and wore a monocle. He had probably become an Archmage around that age, in which case the events of 10 years before were now unfolding. Suddenly the girl thought that if she remembered the content of the novel about Archmage Velen well, but then she was suddenly interrupted by her friend's voice. Lancia asked her if she might be in pain. If she is sick, there is a pharmacist nearby, so you can go to the counter and ask for medicine. Isel answered her that it was nothing, she was fine. Then she thanked her for giving her a ride, so she didn't have to carry the heavy book. Lancia was very happy at this answer, and said she was so relieved. Then Isel asked if she was all right, but she didn't understand what she was saying. Isel said she heard everything, but the girl replied that it was all right. That sort of thing didn't bother her at all. Isel said that because her family was bankrupt, but Lancia replied that she was still an aristocrat nonetheless. Moreover, Isel, is more like an aristocrat and doesn't even speak the dialect. After a while, they finally arrived. When Isel got off the wagon, she thanked the girl for giving her a ride, and told her that she shouldn't worry so much about the dialect. It didn't seem strange at all. Lancia looked a little embarrassed, and the girl said to be sure of herself. So what if she uses a little dialect? If she's really that worried about it, then let her try to control herself better in the future, and Isel will help her with that. As she left, Isel thought it would take some time for Lancia to become the aristocrat they wanted her to be. At this time, in one of the estates, the blind priest Wahidman Paddleton Basquiel said that today he had heard very interesting news. Gerald asked, "And what's the news?" Such a man replied that his grandson, who was attending the class, had left the class because his nose was bleeding. Gerald wanted to justify it somehow, but Wahidman interrupted him and said he adored his education policy and waited patiently for 2 years. He gave his own instructions for his unfortunate grandson. However, this was not enough for him, and he could not even last 1 day, so he ran away. Wahidman asked Gerald what he thought about it. He replied that Raven was still small, and that it was the first time he had seen blood. But Wahidman told Gerald that what he was asking was none of his business, and that Raven could perfectly well speak for himself, for he had a mouth. His grandfather asked if he had only followed his decree because of the nosebleed, or if there was something else. The boy didn't know what to say to that. He said he'd heard about Raven being beaten up by a pathetic girl, and asked if it was true. Gerald wanted to intervene, but his father wouldn't let him. After that, they sat in silence for a while, and Wahidman said that it was funny that a descendant of a sideline of the Basquiel family dared to touch its direct descendant. Even so, he can't turn a blind eye to the fact that his grandson smugly left class. Raven apologized to him, but then suddenly Wahidman said to bring him this girl. Gerald was very surprised at this. He had not expected it. At that moment, Gerald looked at his son and said that he had done a very good job, then whispered, "Idiot." The boy tearfully apologized to his father, but it was all to no avail. Isel, no matter how much she thought about the novel that mentioned Archmage Velen, she feels like it was far from the romance genre. She likes this particular genre best, though, so she's hardly even read the others. The Basquiel family and the Archmage the girl has a rough idea of what this work is, but she has no way of remembering all the details. All she can think of is nothing but despair and destruction, extinction and a world that is full of blood and war. Isel, who was walking down the street, looked up at the sky and thought that this whole beautiful world would die soon. The girl does not remember the details of the plot, but at least she knows the general picture of the original work, the typical fantasy content of the novel, in which evil spreading from afar destroys the world, and the people who tried to stop it become the main heroes and win. But now what was written on the pages of the book has become her reality. Evil comes and the world is on the verge of destruction. In other words, the girl herself may die. Isel thought that, reborn as a noblewoman, she could enjoy life with a golden spoon in her mouth. But her family went bankrupt, and their gold turned to dirt. Now it turns out that she will die young because the world will be destroyed. Isel couldn't believe that this was really possible. Could she have gotten it wrong? Would the world really end? Even though Isel had to endure the hardships of poverty day after day, the world seemed peaceful and serene. The war seemed distant and alien. It was hard for the girl to imagine monsters destroying everything. In the capital, she still couldn't believe that this beautiful world could be destroyed. At this point, Isel had already approached the store. The salesman looked at her and asked, "What business is she here for again?" Isel said hello to him, and the salesman asked, "Has she come again to borrow a book?" The man said the place sold books, not recoil. He was already annoyed that he had to repeat this time and time again. Isel didn't say anything to him, but just smiled. Then the salesman hesitated and told her to return everything before the store closed. Afterward he asked, "What book does she want?" But the girl replied that she had not come for a book. The seller was very surprised and asked, "Why then? She's not looking for a playmate, is she?" Isel said it was nice to have a friend to brighten up boring everyday life, but that wasn't what she was here for. She had a question. When the salesgirl pulled out the paper and said it was about this, the man was surprised and asked, "What's wrong with this paper?" Isel asked him, "Is there really only one single major newspaper publisher in the capital city?" The man thought for a while. Then he said that there are 3 publishing houses in the capital that print morning newspapers every day. However, this is the only one that is able to print evening papers as well. But he didn't understand why the girl was asking that. Isel ignored his question and asked if he could tell if there was a newspaper that had relatively recently begun printing the morning news. The man thought about it and said that if you looked for it, there might be such a publishing house. He didn't understand why he was answering her questions so seriously. An 8-year-old child cannot have any idea what a morning and evening newspaper is. So he asked the girl why she was asking him such questions. Isel said she was just curious if a newspaper publisher called Knox was among the newly opened. The salesman said that if she was interested in Knox's, which had recently started up, it was over there, and he showed her the direction. Then asked how on earth she knew about it. The man asked, "Maybe her father tried to get a job there, or maybe she's going to go there herself to try her luck." But Isel didn't say anything to him, just turned around and walked away. Heading toward the publisher, she thought, "This is the publisher that first reported the impending end of the world." Despite the pressure exerted by the nobles on the press, motivated by their desire to reveal their secrets and escape, it was Knox who continued to print newspapers, covering the latest news. The publisher printed a newspaper, causing great chaos in the capital, and in the process, a rebellion broke out. When the girl walked in the direction the peddler pointed her, she realized that there was indeed a Knox publishing house there. It pleased her that she hadn't gotten anything wrong, but she didn't understand whether the fact that Knox Publishing existed should make her happy or sad. Looking at the situation positively, Isel knows the future that is about to happen. Of course, she cannot describe in detail what will happen tomorrow, but she knows the main events of history. In fact, it's a good money-making opportunity. Perhaps she will finally be able to escape from this poverty. However, if you look at the situation from the other side, the undeniable fact remains that the world is on the verge of destruction. Like it or not, the world is going to die, and Isel may die too. In other words, it's as if she's been given a death sentence she can't do anything about. And far more importantly, unlike the overall content, she is completely unable to recall the names of the main characters in the narrative. Isel didn't understand how anyone could remember the name of the main character in a novel that had been read years ago. Even if she tried to strain her memory, she continued to have doubts about it. Isel realized that in addition, the main characters were still too young, but the girl thought that it was not time for her to fill her head with such thoughts. It's time to use the knowledge you've gained and act to save this world. After that, Isel returned home. Her parents were talking about something, and she didn't know how to tell them. Kids as young as 8 years old have a lot to make if something happens in the future. She would have to deal with that. The girl wondered if her parents would believe everything she said. Isel looked at them and realized that of course not. Even if she had said something, they would have just let it pass and pretended it wasn't happening. Either way, Isel has to give them some sort of clue. But then suddenly the girl is approached by her mom and asked if she's okay. Isel interrupted from her musings and said that everything was fine. When her mother asked why she looked so serious, at this point, Spencer thought maybe she had something bad going on. When her mom asked her about it, the girl said that nothing had happened and she was fine. Spencer asked his daughter if she was having any problems during class, but the girl didn't have time to answer because someone knocked on their door. His wife was very surprised and asked what guest there could be at such a time. But the censor went to open the door, and it was already very dark outside. He thought it was very rude to knock so hard on the door. After he opened it, he asked the people in front of him who they were. One of the men in front asked if he was Isel Latanya Spencer's father. His name is Beoric Spencer. The man replied that he was Beoric, and asked who they were. Beoric looked closer at the man and saw a sword. So he thought it was definitely a knight. But he didn't understand what a knight was doing this late in the day. The man said that Beoric needed to meet someone tomorrow. Then he handed him an envelope. Beoric looked at the envelope and saw the coat of arms of the Basquiel family, then asked who it was that sent them. Well, the man said it was a man who valued punctuality very much, so he had better not be late. Beoric asked why he was looking for him. Well, that is, but the man kept talking and said that if he arrived at the place and met with whoever was needed, Beoric couldn't stand it at that moment, and shouted for them to listen to him. He asked why the hell they had come, and were telling him to meet someone without explaining anything. Shouldn't they at least tell him who sent it and why? Is that what the knights of the Basquiel family do now? He asked. The men looked at each other briefly. Then the stranger took off his hood and said that he was Baron Bramberg, a knight of the personal guard of His Excellency Duke Wahidman Basquiel. Beoric was very surprised that a knight of the Duke's personal guard appeared to him in his own right. The Baron said that His Excellency wishes to meet Miss Isel Latanya. In view of his daughter's young age, His Excellency asks that she accompany him. Beoric was surprised and asked why this man suddenly needed to see his daughter. The Baron said he would find out the details tomorrow when he arrived. If he shows the letter at the entrance, someone will escort him out. So don't let him be late. The Baron looked at him for a moment. After that he said he had nothing more to say, putting on his hood. He wished him good night. When Beoric returned home, his wife immediately asked what had happened, who had made him scream like that. At that moment the man showed his wife the sheet that had been handed to him. Isel did not understand what was happening, why some hostile atmosphere had appeared. Beoric then turned to his daughter and asked, "Is that what this is all about?" The girl did not understand what it was about and asked about it. Her father held out to her the sheet they had given her. When she saw the coat of arms of the Basquiel family, she became serious. Her father asked her what the hell happened. Then let her tell the truth, for Duke Wahidman Basquiel wants to see her. Isel was shocked when she heard that. She couldn't believe that that boy had really complained to his grandfather. Apparently that was why he wanted to see her. It's hard for her to imagine Duke Basquiel intervening in a child's fight. He must have a lot on his plate. Her father looked at the girl carefully, and he really wanted her to tell him the truth. Isel thought at that moment that the truth was that she was hardly going to have a good relationship anyway. At this time in his estate, Raven was yelling at the workers to get out of the way because he needed to get out. But the guard told the young master that he could not do that yet. The boy replied that he would have a headache, so he needed rest. The other guard, when he heard this, asked if he was in a lot of pain. If so, he will bring medicine now. but he still can't leave this room. Raven got angry and asked if the man was willing to be responsible for him coming down because he wasn't feeling well. He could deal with his studies later, and who were they to tell him anyway? The guards did not answer anything, but simply remained silent. Then the boy told them to get out of the way. He would go mad if he stayed in this room for even a second longer. But then suddenly Gerald came up to them and addressed his son. The boy was immediately frightened and wanted to say that it was just a misunderstanding. But his father interrupted him and said that he can't even do even one day as he says. Has the boy already forgotten his words? And then Raven said that until the sun came up, or until his father said enough, he must stay in his room. But then suddenly Gerald said that he hadn't given his permission, and the sun wasn't on the horizon yet, and he was already out. Raven immediately changed in front of his father. He said he had a headache, so he was going to get some rest. The boy was very afraid of getting angry. Gerald said that was one more excuse. Apparently he overestimated him, but the boy began to protest. He said that no, and starting from the next time, he would try hard and everything would work out. But his father interrupted him and told him he was fed up with his promises. The next time, he thinks he doesn't need to tell him how much shame and humiliation he will get because of that one word. Raven started to apologize to his father and he said he'd really make it right next time, but then he got quiet and said that no, right now he'd make it right. Holding back tears, the boy said he would go back to his room right away and study hard, so he begged his father for forgiveness. When the boy wanted to say something else, Gerald interrupted him and asked, "Says her name, Isel Lithania? That miss from the Spencero family, the one he was hearing about for the first time in his life." Raven didn't understand why his father had brought up that girl, but at that moment, Gerald threw a textbook at his son and said that she had now come here with her father to meet with the chapter. The boy was surprised and interjected, "How so with his grandfather?" Gerald, leaving, said that he had heard that he had an exam coming up, so he hoped the boy wouldn't disappoint him. The next day, Beoric and his daughter came to meet him after all. The man thought she would probably be punished for hurting his precious grandson. They were told to wait a bit before going in. Beoric thought that, given the unpleasant words he'd thrown at Azel, he thought there was no need to worry about that. But he didn't know if Wahidman was capable of showing mercy. The Duke might even expel Azel from the class, and that would be very bad. Thinking of his daughter's peace of mind, it seemed to him that it was better for her not to attend the class at all. But since she had expressed her desire to go there, he couldn't tell her no. So Beoric must beg the Duke's forgiveness, even if he had to get on his knees. He's responsible for his daughter's actions. That's why he was called here. Suddenly he was distracted from his thoughts by Isel. She took a cookie from the table and said it was so good. Afterward, Daddy looked sweetly at his daughter. Isel asked him if everything was all right. She was eating too much, but the man replied that she should eat as much as she wanted. In the past, the Spencer family could afford all the sweets they wanted, and Isel could eat as many as she wanted. But things are different now. As she ate the cookies, she wondered what she should do. She didn't show it on the outside, but in her heart she was thinking feverishly about what she should say. When an adult gets involved in a child's fight, that's mean in itself. But we're talking about Duke Beskiel himself. They live in a class society, so there's nothing you can do about it. You have to adapt. But suddenly a maid came to them and said that they had waited a long time and that his lordship was waiting for them. Beoric asked her where to go. The maid said that his lordship was in the study. She would escort them. At that moment, the father took his daughter by the hand and said that they should go now. After a while they came to the study, and the maid said that his lordship was inside and they could come in. Isel was very surprised that they could go inside like that. After that, having gathered courage, they came in after all. When I saw them, I told them to come into the office. Beoric was very frightened. Even at the mere sight of the Emperor, Wahidman told them not to make it look as if he had brought them to an execution. In fact, he just wants to talk. Let them come closer. It's not a big deal after all. Her father continued to stand, and in the meantime, Isel began to look around the office. She saw some strange bags standing in the corner. She thought maybe it was food. Wahidman began to look at the girl carefully. She felt his gaze on her and she thought he was angry, or maybe not. Isel thought maybe it was because she was the culprit of her absenteeism, his precious grandchild. But then suddenly the Duke spoke and said Sabajos looked at him and immediately cried. Isel didn't know what he was talking about, and the Duke said Raven was tired of writing. Then he saw the girl's puzzled look and asked if she wasn't afraid of him. Isel said in a surprised voice that she was afraid, of course. She wondered if there was anyone in the world who wasn't afraid of someone who could get rid of him in an instant. Wahidman hesitated for a moment. He kept looking at her and thought that there was not an ounce of fear in her eyes. Come to think of it, children and adults alike freeze when they see him. Take her father, for example. Unlike her daughter, he is full of anxiety and worry. He can't even speak for fear. The Duke then told the girl that despite her fear, she was not crying or trying to run away. Isel asked in a nonchalant voice if they would let them go home if she cried. Wahidman thought she was feisty after all. As giddy as his grandson was, it wasn't from me, and the fact that he was beaten, he was curious to know more about this kid. Then he asked if she knew the origin of the last name Spencer. The girl replied that she did not know. The Duke said that many people believe that the Spencers are their sideline. The surname was formed when a member of the Basquiel family ran away and had a child out of wedlock. In other words, she and the girl are so distant that it's hard to even remember a common ancestor. Isel at this point thought, that is, the Duke is the mother-in-law's fourth cousin. Wahidman said that she had harmed his grandson, who is a direct descendant of the Basquiel family, and he asked what she thought about it, whether he should be with him in relation to her. But then suddenly Beoric intervened in the conversation. He said if someone was to be punished, let him punish him, and Isel would remain innocent. The Duke was surprised and asked if he was not the culprit. So why does he wish to be punished? But no matter how young the girl is, she should learn to take responsibility for her actions. The Duke asked him, doesn't he know how irresponsible a father's care for his children is? Beoric replied that he didn't. However, Isel is still very young for all this. Wahidman said that if a girl is young, it does not mean she can get away with anything, and asked what he thought would be the appropriate punishment in such a case. Isel was shocked. She didn't expect her grandfather to actually stand up for his grandson. Because of the nosebleed, the overbearing man who was said to be the best in the empire turned out to be very petty. Then the girl asked the Duke whether she was bound to receive punishment. Wahidman asked, is there any reason why she should not receive it? The girl replied that of course there was, but she didn't think he would find it acceptable. Suddenly Beoric shouted at his daughter, meaning, because you're only making it worse. Have seen quite a long time and a lot of things at this point, but have never yet seen a kid keep his eyes on him for a minute. Wahidman said she would be punished if she did not speak. From what he heard, his grandson was not very well behaved either. He has no leniency or patience, and the girl doesn't want to give a reason why she can't be punished, so she'll get the same punishment as Raven. Isel was surprised and asked, and what punishment is that? The Duke told her to write a letter of remorse. 2 sheets would be enough. Let her bring it with her next time. Beoric was surprised that the Duke had given her such a punishment, and Wahidman said that he thought it was enough for a child of 8 years old. He was surprised and asked the man, did he really think he would order her leg to be cut off? Then he asked the Duke, well, how is she still afraid of him? Isel said not much at all. Wahidman said it's hard to find someone who isn't afraid of something like this, but it should be strong enough to touch someone in the Basquiel family. He just wanted to know how important the kid who bled into his grandson's first class was, that's all. Isel, in that moment, for some reason, everything felt so familiar, this man. It was as if she knew what was coming, and at that moment, she remembered that he had died in an accident before the original story began. And then the girl thought about what she had seen in his office when she first entered. Those bags. There's something wrong with them. There's hardly any food in there.